Grandma, you always told me that love finds us when we least expect it, but I never believed you until that sweltering Tuesday morning when everything changed. Let me tell you about Vincent Corleone, the youngest CEO in Manhattan's history, who thought he had everything figured out until he saw her. Vincent's Bentley crawled through the gridlock traffic of Fifth Avenue, his Italian leather shoes tapping impatiently against the floor mat. The air conditioning hummed at full blast, but sweat still beaded on his forehead, not from the heat, but from the crushing weight of the phone call he'd just ended. His company's stock had plummeted 20% overnight. The board was calling for an emergency meeting. His father's legacy, everything the old man had built from nothing, was crumbling in Vincent's 32-year-old hands. "Sir, we're going to be stuck here for at least another 20 minutes, his driver, James, called through the partition. Vincent closed his eyes and thought of you, Grandma. You would have said something about patience being a virtue, about how the universe has its own timing. He almost smiled, remembering how you'd pat his hand whenever he was rushing through life as a boy. That's when he saw her. Through the tinted window, past the honking taxis and cursing pedestrians, stood the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She couldn't have been more than 22, with long, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and eyes that sparkled with determination, despite the obvious exhaustion etched in her face. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days, and in her hands she carried a cooler filled with bottled water. "Water! Ice-cold water! Only $2!" she called out to the passing crowd. Her voice carried a slight accent that Vincent couldn't quite place. There was something about her voice, Grandma. It reminded me of wind chimes on your back porch, gentle but persistent. Most people walked by without a second glance, too busy with their phones and their own problems to notice the girl trying so hard to make a living. But Vincent couldn't look away. There was a grace in how she moved, a dignity in how she held herself, despite what was clearly a difficult situation. A businessman in an expensive suit stopped and bought a bottle, and when she smiled at him, genuinely smiled, Vincent felt something shift in his chest. It was like that moment in the old movies you used to watch with me, Grandma, when the music swells and time seems to stop. He was falling in love with a stranger selling water on the street, and he didn't even know her name. Part 2. Character Foundation. Grandma, I need to tell you about who Vincent really was before that moment because you always said a man's past shapes his heart. Vincent Corleone wasn't born into wealth. His father, Antonio, had built their empire from a single food truck, working 18-hour days until his hands were raw and his dreams became reality. By the time Vincent graduated from Harvard Business School, Corleone Industries was worth $2 billion. But success came with a price. He had never had a real relationship, never felt the kind of love that makes you forget about everything else. His world was board meetings and stock prices, mergers and acquisitions. He dated socialites and models, but they were attracted to his bank account, not his heart. He had started to believe that real love, the kind you and Grandpa had, was just a fairy tale. The girl on the street, however, was different. Her name was Elena Karenina, and if Vincent had known her story, his heart would have broken and mended itself all at once. Elena had arrived in New York 2 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. She was studying pre-med at Columbia, working 3 jobs to pay her tuition because her family back in Romania couldn't afford to help. Her father was a teacher, her mother cleaned houses, and Elena had promised them she'd become a doctor and change their lives forever. Every morning at 5 a.m., she'd buy cases of water from a wholesale distributor, then spend her day walking the streets of Manhattan, selling them for just enough profit to pay for another day of school. Her feet were covered in blisters, her back ached from carrying the heavy cooler, but she never complained. You would have loved her strength, Grandma. That Tuesday morning, Elena had already been walking for 6 hours. She had only sold 12 bottles, and she needed to sell 30 just to break even for the day. Rent was due in a week, and she was $40 short. As she stood in that traffic, calling out to indifferent strangers, she was fighting back tears and praying to whatever force might be listening. Vincent watched her for 10 full minutes, completely forgetting about his company's crisis. There was something about the way she carried herself, proud but not arrogant, determined but not desperate. When a taxi driver yelled at her to move out of the way, she just smiled politely and stepped aside. "James?" Vincent said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, sir?" "Pull over. Right here. Sir, we're in the middle of traffic. Pull over. Now!"
As the Bentley's door opened and Vincent stepped onto the scorching asphalt, Elena looked up, and their eyes met for the first time. "Grandma, I wish I could describe to you what happened in that moment. It was like lightning striking twice in the same place, like finding something you didn't even know you'd lost." Vincent walked toward her, his heart pounding harder than it ever had in any business meeting. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice came out softer than he intended. "How much for all of it?" Elena blinked, confused. "All of what?" "All the water, everything in your cooler." She looked down at her remaining bottles, 18 of them, then back up at this man in the $1,000 suit who was looking at her like she was made of starlight. That would be $36. Vincent reached into his wallet and pulled out $500 bills. Elena stared at the money like it might disappear if she breathed too hard. I can't accept this," she whispered, and Vincent knew right then that he was dealing with someone extraordinary. In his world, people grabbed at money like drowning swimmers reaching for life preservers. But this girl, this beautiful girl, with dirt under her fingernails and dreams in her eyes, was turning down more money than she probably made in a month. "Yes, you can," Vincent said gently. "Consider it an investment." "In what?" Vincent looked into her eyes and felt his entire world shift. "In whatever you're trying to achieve." Grandma, if anyone reading this has ever felt that spark of recognition, that moment when you meet someone and know your life will never be the same, please leave a comment below. Tell us about your moment, because what happened next would change everything. Part 3. The Inciting Incident. Elena's hands trembled as she stared at the money Vincent was offering. $500. It was more than she made in 2 weeks of selling water, enough to cover rent and buy groceries, and maybe even afford that textbook she'd been putting off purchasing. I don't understand," she said, her accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions rose. "Why would you do this?" Vincent found himself at a loss for words. How do you tell a stranger that looking at them makes you believe in magic again? How do you explain that their smile just rewrote everything you thought you knew about yourself? "Because," he said finally, "you remind me of someone very important to me." He was thinking of you, Grandma, of course, of your strength and determination, of how you never let pride get in the way of providing for your family. Elena looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for deception or hidden motives. She'd been approached by plenty of men since arriving in New York, men who saw a young, struggling immigrant and thought she might be desperate enough to compromise her values. But this man, there was something different in his eyes. Kindness, maybe, or loneliness. "What's your name?" she asked. "Vincent. Vincent Corleone." He extended his hand, and when she took it, he felt electricity shoot up his arm. Her hand was small and calloused from hard work, but her grip was firm and confident. Elena Karenina." She hesitated, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "Mr. Corleone, I'll take your money, but only if you let me earn it." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'll work for you, whatever you need. Cleaning, organizing, anything. I won't take charity, but I'll take a job." Behind them, James was leaning on the horn, trying to get Vincent's attention. The traffic was starting to move, and important people were waiting. But Vincent found he didn't care about any of that. For the first time in his life, something mattered more than business. "Actually," he said, an idea forming in his mind, "I might have something. But first, tell me, what are you studying?" "Pre-med at Columbia. I want to be a pediatric surgeon." Elena's face lit up when she talked about her dreams, and Vincent felt his heart skip a beat. "I want to help children who can't help themselves." Vincent thought about his company's charity foundation, about all the hospitals and clinics they supported. He thought about how genuine passion was so rare in his world of corporate climbers and social chameleons. "Elena," he said, "how would you like to help me save children's lives professionally?" She looked at him suspiciously. "What kind of work?" "My company runs a foundation that funds pediatric medical research. We need someone who understands both the medical side and what it's like to struggle for your dreams. Someone real." Vincent pulled out his business card. "Someone like you." The next morning, Vincent arrived at his office earlier than usual, which was saying something since he typically got there by 6 a.m. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying every moment of his encounter with Elena. He'd changed his shirt 3 times, settled on his lucky tie, the blue one you'd given him for Christmas, and found himself checking the lobby security feed every 5 minutes starting at 8 a.m. Elena, meanwhile, stood outside the gleaming Corleone Industries building, staring up at its 47 floors and feeling like she was about to enter another world. She'd worn her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and had practiced introducing herself in the mirror that morning until her roommate told her she sounded like she was applying to be a robot. When she finally walked through the marble lobby, Vincent was waiting by the elevators, trying to look casual and failing miserably. His assistant, Maria, shot him a questioning look. In 10 years of working for Vincent, she'd never seen him personally greet anyone below executive level. "Elena," Vincent said, and his voice carried relief and something else Maria couldn't quite identify. "You came!" "I said I would," but Vincent caught the slight waver in her voice. She was nervous too. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was silent, except for the soft jazz playing overhead. Vincent kept stealing glances at Elena's reflection in the polished steel doors, noting how she held herself straight despite her obvious anxiety. Elena, for her part, was trying not to think about how Vincent's cologne smelled like cedar and rain, or how his presence seemed to fill the entire small space. "Mr. Corleone," she said finally, "what exactly will I be doing?" Vincent turned to face her fully, and the sincerity in his eyes made her heart skip. "I want you to help me figure out which medical research projects we should fund. You have something none of my advisors have. You understand what it's like to fight for your dreams. You know which battles are worth fighting." The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to reveal a floor that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. Modern art hung on pristine white walls, and everything gleamed with quiet luxury. But Vincent barely noticed any of it. He was watching Elena's face as she took in her surroundings, seeing the slight intimidation she tried to hide, the way she touched her simple dress unconsciously. "Elena," Vincent said softly, "you belong here." She looked at him in surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because," Vincent said, leading her toward his office, "the best people are the ones who question whether they belong." What Vincent didn't tell her was that he'd spent the previous evening researching everything he could find about her. Not in a creepy way, Grandma, you raised me better than that, but in the way a man does when he's trying to understand someone who's captured his heart completely.
He'd learned that she'd graduated summa cum laude from her high school in Romania, that she'd won a full scholarship to Columbia, but it only covered tuition, not living expenses. He'd read her admissions essay, which had brought tears to his eyes, as she wrote about watching her younger brother die from a treatable heart condition because their village had no proper medical facilities.
Elena had no idea that Vincent now understood exactly why she was so determined to become a doctor, why she'd work herself to exhaustion rather than accept charity, why helping children meant everything to her. Their first day working together was a revelation. Vincent had expected to spend most of his time explaining complex financial concepts, but Elena absorbed information like a sponge. More than that, she asked questions that no one else thought to ask. "This research proposal," she said, pointing to a thick document about childhood cancer treatments, "says they need $3 million over 5 years, but they're planning to test on children in developing countries. What kind of follow-up care are they providing?" Vincent looked at the proposal he'd been ready to approve without question. I don't see that addressed anywhere." "Exactly." Elena's eyes flashed with passion. "They want to use poor children as test subjects, but there's no plan to actually help those children long term. This isn't medical research. It's medical colonialism." That was the moment Vincent realized he wasn't just attracted to Elena's beauty. He was falling for her mind, her heart, her unwavering moral compass. In a world where people told him what they thought he wanted to hear, she told him what he needed to hear. By lunchtime, they'd reviewed 12 proposals and rejected 8 of them for ethical concerns Elena had spotted that Vincent's team of Harvard and Yale graduates had missed completely. "You're incredible," Vincent said as they sat in his office, eating sandwiches he'd ordered from the deli down the street. He'd wanted to take her to the Four Seasons, but she'd insisted on something simple. Elena blushed and looked down at her hands. "I just ask different questions because I come from a different world." "That's exactly why I need you," Vincent said, and the words came out more intensely than he'd intended. They stared at each other across his desk, and the air between them crackled with unspoken feelings. Elena was the first to look away. "Mr. Corleone?" "Vincent, please." "Vincent," she said, and his name sounded like music in her voice. "We should keep things professional." Vincent nodded, but Grandma, I could see in his eyes that it was already too late for that. He was completely gone for this girl, and she was fighting feelings just as strong. As the days turned into weeks, their professional relationship became the kind of partnership that happens maybe once in a lifetime. They worked together seamlessly, challenging each other, making each other better. The Corleone Foundation started funding revolutionary research projects that were actually making a difference in children's lives around the world. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore what was growing between them. Vincent would catch himself staring at Elena as she concentrated on reading medical journals. Elena would find excuses to bring him coffee, just to see his face light up when she walked into his office. If anyone watching this story has ever been in love with someone they couldn't have, please hit that like button and share your story in the comments. Because Vincent and Elena were about to discover that the biggest obstacles to love sometimes come from within our own hearts. The tension was building to a breaking point, and neither of them was prepared for what was coming next. Part 5. The Midpoint Revelation. 3 weeks into working together, Vincent and Elena had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They arrived at the office at the same time each morning, Vincent having adjusted his schedule to match hers, and left together each evening, walking to the subway station, where Vincent would watch her disappear underground, fighting the urge to offer her a ride home every single day. It was during their 4th Friday evening walk that everything changed. "Elena, Can I ask you something personal? Vincent said, as they paused at the subway entrance. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the streetlights. That depends on what it is. Why medicine? I know what you wrote in your application essay, but I want to hear it from you. Elena was quiet for so long that Vincent thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. When I was 12, my little brother Mikhail got sick, really sick. His heart was failing, and in our village, there was nothing the doctor could do except make him comfortable. For 6 months, I watched the strongest, funniest, most beautiful little boy in the world slowly fade away. He was only 7, Vincent, 7 years old, and he died because we didn't have the money or the resources to save him.
Vincent felt his chest tighten with emotion. He'd read about this in her essay, but hearing it in her voice, seeing the pain in her eyes, it was completely different. The night before he died, Elena continued, Mikhail made me promise him something. He said, Lena, when you grow up, you have to save all the other little boys and girls so they don't have to leave their families like I do. And I promised him I would. Vincent couldn't help himself. He reached out and gently took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Elena didn't pull away. That's why you work so hard, he said. That's why you can't accept charity. You're not just trying to become a doctor. You're trying to keep a promise to your brother. Every day, Elena nodded. Every single day I think about him. When I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I want to give up, I remember Mikhail's face, and I keep going. They stood there in the middle of bustling Manhattan, surrounded by honking taxis and shouting pedestrians, holding hands and looking into each other's souls. Vincent had never felt so connected to another human being in his life. Elena, he said softly, you're going to be an amazing doctor. Your brother would be so proud. That's when she kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated. Elena just rose up on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, pouring all of her gratitude and growing feelings into that one perfect moment. Vincent's free hand came up to cup her face, and for 10 seconds, the rest of the world disappeared completely. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Oh my God," Elena gasped, stepping back. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I work for you, and I said I don't date my boss, and—" "Elena," Vincent interrupted gently. "Breathe." She took a shaky breath, then another. "I need to tell you something," Vincent said, his voice serious. "And after I tell you, you can decide what happens next." Elena nodded, her heart pounding. "I've been in love with you since the moment I saw you selling water on Fifth Avenue. Not infatuated, not attracted, in love. The real kind. The kind that makes you want to be a better person. The kind that makes you believe in forever." Elena stared at him, speechless. "I know all the reasons why this is complicated. I know you work for me. I know we come from different worlds. I know you have goals that have nothing to do with me. But, Elena, I've never felt anything like this before, and I don't think I ever will again." The subway train rumbled beneath their feet, and Elena could feel tears starting to fall down her cheeks. "Vincent," she whispered, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then we can figure out the rest. Together." Elena looked into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected back at her. The truth was, she'd been falling for him too. Not for his money or his power, but for the way he listened to her ideas as if they mattered, the way he brought her coffee exactly how she liked it, The way he'd started keeping pictures of the children their foundation helped on his desk because she'd mentioned it made the work feel more real. But she also saw all the obstacles between them, the differences in their backgrounds, the professional complications, the fact that she was still 2 years away from medical school and had no idea where life would take her next. "Vincent," she said finally, "I care about you. More than I should, more than I plan to. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of this ending badly, of losing my job, of falling so hard for you that I forget who I was before I met you." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've worked so hard to build this life, to become independent. What if being with you means I lose myself?" Vincent felt his heart break a little because he understood exactly what she was afraid of. In his world, he'd seen plenty of relationships where one person got swallowed up by the other's success or wealth. "What if I told you that being with you makes me more myself than I've ever been?" Elena looked at him questioningly. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, running my father's company, making money, checking boxes. But working with you these past few weeks, seeing the world through your eyes, it's like I remembered why any of this matters." Vincent squeezed her hand. "You don't make me want to change you, Elena. You make me want to change the world with you." They stood there for another long moment, and Vincent could practically see Elena weighing everything in her mind.
"Okay," she said finally. "Okay? Okay, let's try. But we do this carefully, and we do it right. No more boss-employee dynamic. If we're going to be together, we have to be equals." Vincent grinned, and Elena realized it was the first time she'd seen him truly, completely happy. "Does this mean I can finally offer you a ride home?" he asked. Elena laughed, and the sound was like bells ringing. "Yes, Vincent, you can offer me a ride home." As they walked back toward his car, Vincent pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his assistant. "Maria, I need you to restructure Elena's position. As of Monday, she reports directly to the board, not to me. Full consultant status, competitive salary." Elena read the text over his shoulder and stopped walking. "Vincent, you can't—" "Yes, I can. And I should have done it the first day. You're too smart and too talented to be anyone's assistant, even mine." Grandma, I wish you could have seen Elena's face in that moment. She looked like someone who just realized she was allowed to dream bigger than she'd ever imagined. But what none of them knew was that Vincent's ex-fiancée, Catherine, had been watching them from across the street, and she was not pleased with what she saw. Part 6. Darkest Hour. Grandma, you always told me that the path to true love is never smooth, and Vincent and Elena were about to learn that lesson in the hardest way possible. Their happiness lasted exactly 4 weeks. 4 perfect weeks of morning coffee together, evening walks through Central Park, quiet dinners at little restaurants Elena picked because she said the best food came from places that didn't need to impress anyone. Vincent had never been happier, and Elena was starting to believe that maybe fairy tales could happen to girls like her. Then, Catherine Theron walked back into Vincent's life. Catherine was everything Elena wasn't. Manhattan royalty, old money connected to everyone who mattered in high society. She and Vincent had been engaged 2 years earlier, a merger of families as much as hearts, until Vincent had broken it off because he realized he didn't love her. Not really. Not the way a man should love the woman he's going to marry. But Catherine had never accepted that their story was over. She chose her moment perfectly. Vincent was in London on business, and Elena was working late in the office reviewing grant applications for pediatric research programs.
Elena had been promoted to Director of Medical Initiatives, making more money in a month than she used to make in 6 months selling water. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worried about rent or groceries. She could focus entirely on her studies and her work with the foundation. "So you're the little water girl who's been keeping my Vincent so entertained." Elena looked up from her desk to find a woman in a designer suit standing in the doorway. She was beautiful in an intimidating way, all sharp angles and perfect makeup and confidence that came from never having to worry about anything in her entire life. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Catherine Theron, Vincent's fiancée." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Fiancé? Vincent isn't engaged." "Oh, honey, is that what he told you? Vincent and I have been engaged for 3 years. We're just taking a little break while he gets this midlife crisis out of his system." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Catherine pulled out her phone and showed Elena a photo. Vincent in a tuxedo, Catherine in a wedding dress, both of them laughing. "This was taken at my cousin's wedding last month, while you were playing house with him. He was my date." Elena stared at the photo, her heart sinking. Vincent had been out of town that weekend. He said it was for business. "You see," continued Catherine, settling into the chair across from Elena's desk like she owned the place, "Vincent has a type. Pretty little charity cases who make him feel important. There was Sophia, the refugee he rescued from a sweatshop, then Maria, the single mother he put through law school, and now you, the poor Romanian girl selling water." Each word hit Elena like a physical blow. "You're lying!" "Am I? Has he ever taken you to meet his family? Has he introduced you to his friends? Have you been to a single social event together?" Catherine tilted her head, watching Elena's face crumble as she realized the answer to all those questions was no. "Vincent likes to play hero, darling, but when it comes time for the real thing, marriage, children, building a life, he always comes back to his own kind."
Elena sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. It was true that Vincent had kept their relationship mostly private. He'd said it was to protect her from media attention. But what if it was really because he was ashamed of her? "Why are you telling me this?" Elena whispered. "Because I'm tired of waiting for him to get bored and come home," Catherine said simply. "And because you seem like a nice enough girl. You don't deserve to waste your youth on a man who will never choose you over his real life." Catherine stood up and smoothed her skirt. "Vincent will be back from London tomorrow. Ask him about the wedding. Ask him about our family's expectations. Ask him what his father thinks about you." She paused at the door. "Or, better yet, save yourself the heartbreak and just walk away now. Trust me, it's kinder to both of you." After Catherine left, Elena sat alone in the office, staring at the photos of children their foundation had helped that Vincent kept on his desk. Children whose lives had been saved because she and Vincent worked so well together, because they made each other better, because they shared the same values. But what if Catherine was right? What if Elena was just the latest in a long line of charity cases Vincent had rescued and discarded? Elena thought about her brother Mikhail, about the promise she'd made to him. She'd gotten distracted from that promise, swept up in expensive dinners and a handsome CEO who made her feel like she was living in a movie. But girls like her didn't get fairy tale endings. Girls like her had to work twice as hard for half as much, and they couldn't afford to let their hearts derail their dreams. When Vincent called that night, Elena almost didn't answer. "Elena, sweetheart, is everything okay? You sound strange." "Vincent," she said, and her voice was carefully controlled. "We need to talk when you get back." "Talk about what? Elena, you're scaring me." Elena closed her eyes and thought about Catherine's perfect smile, about all the reasons why Vincent would never really choose her,
about how naive she'd been to think this could last. "About the fact that this isn't working," she said, and hated how easily the lie came. "What? Elena, what happened? Did something happen at work?" "Nothing happened at work. I've been thinking, and this was a mistake. We're too different, Vincent. We want different things." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Elena," Vincent said finally, and his voice was soft with hurt. "Look at me. I know you can't see me, but look at me anyway. Do you really believe what you just said?" Elena bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. "Yes." "Then I'll be on the next flight home, and we'll talk face to face, because the Elena I know doesn't give up on things that matter without a fight." After he hung up, Elena packed up her desk and wrote a resignation letter. She turned in her key card to security and walked out of the Corleone Industries building, convinced she was doing the right thing for both of them. She had no idea that Catherine had lied about everything, and that Vincent had spent the last 2 weeks in London buying an engagement ring and planning how to propose to the woman he loved more than his own life. "Grandma, sometimes the darkest hour comes not from external enemies, but from the stories we tell ourselves about why we don't deserve happiness." Elena was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. If anyone watching has ever walked away from something good because they were afraid it was too good to be true, please subscribe and tell us your story in the comments, because Vincent was about to prove that real love doesn't give up that easily. Part 7. The Turning Point. Vincent's flight landed at JFK at 6 in the morning, and he drove straight to Elena's apartment building in Queens. He'd been there once before, when she'd forgotten her keys and needed him to wait while their roommate came home. It was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades, but Elena had pointed out the small window box where she grew herbs and talked about how the morning light was perfect for studying. He thought it was charming then. Now, as he climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with desperation and confusion, it just reminded him how different their worlds were. Vincent knocked on the door, softly at first, then with more urgency when no one answered. "Elena, Elena, please, I know you're in there. We need to talk." The door across the hall opened, and a woman in a bathrobe peered out suspiciously. "You looking for Elena? She's gone."
Back to Romania, left yesterday morning with 2 suitcases and tears in her eyes. The neighbor studied Vincent's expensive suit and desperate expression. "You must be the rich boy who broke her heart." "No," Vincent said, his voice barely a whisper. "No, she broke mine." But even as he said it, Vincent knew something was wrong. The Elena he'd fallen in love with didn't run from problems. She faced them head on. She didn't make decisions based on fear. Something had changed her mind, and Vincent was determined to find out what. It took him 3 hours and several well-placed phone calls to discover that Elena had booked a one-way ticket to Bucharest and withdrawn her Columbia University enrollment for the spring semester. It took him another 2 hours to find out that Catherine had visited Elena's office the night before. Vincent sat in his car outside Elena's building, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Catherine. Of course it was Catherine. He should have known she wouldn't give up that easily. He drove to Catherine's penthouse on the Upper East Side like a man possessed, his mind racing through every possible lie she could have told Elena, every seed of doubt she could have planted. Catherine answered the door in silk pajamas and a satisfied smile. "Vincent, you're back early. How was London?" "What did you tell her?" Vincent's voice was dangerously quiet. "Tell who?" Catherine's innocent act was practiced and perfect. "Don't play games with me, Catherine.
What did you tell Elena? Catherine's smile widened. Just the truth, darling, that you and I are meant to be together, that your little charity project was fun while it lasted, but it's time to come back to reality. Vincent stepped closer, and Catherine saw something in his eyes that made her step back. The truth, Vincent's voice rose. The truth is that I haven't spoken to you in 2 years, except when you have forced the conversation. The truth is that I ended our engagement because I realized I was settling for something safe instead of waiting for something real. The truth is that Elena is the best thing that ever happened to me, and you just destroyed it because you can't accept that I don't love you. Vincent, you're being dramatic. You'll thank me for this someday. Get out of my way, Catherine. Where are you going? To get her back. Vincent was already at the elevator when Catherine called after him. She's probably halfway to Romania by now, and even if you find her, do you really think she'll believe you over what she saw with her own eyes? Vincent stopped, his hand on the elevator button. What she saw? Catherine's smile turned cruel. The engagement photos, darling, from my cousin's wedding last month. You looked so handsome in your tuxedo, standing next to me in that white dress. Anyone would assume we were the happy couple. Vincent's heart sank as he remembered that weekend. Catherine's cousin had been getting married, and Catherine's mother had begged Vincent to escort Catherine as a favor to their family's long friendship. He'd spent the entire event deflecting Catherine's advances and talking about Elena to anyone who would listen, but he realized now how it must have looked in photos. "You're sick," Vincent said quietly. "I'm persistent. There's a difference." The elevator doors closed between them, and Vincent was alone with his thoughts and his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. Marcus Aurelius, his private investigator. "Marcus, it's Vincent. I need you to track down a flight to Bucharest. Passenger name Elena Karenina. And then I need you to get me on the next plane to Romania." "Vincent," Marcus said carefully, "it's 3 in the morning there. Whatever this is about, it's about love, Marcus, the real thing, and I'm not losing it because I was too proud or too scared to fight for it." While Marcus worked his contact, Vincent drove home to pack a bag. But first, he had one more stop to make. His father, Antonio Corleone, lived in a modest house in Brooklyn, the same neighborhood where he'd started his business empire from a food truck 35 years earlier. He found him in his garden, tending to the tomato plants he babied like children. "Papa," Vincent said in Italian, the language they used when things were serious, "I need to ask you something." Antonio looked up at his son, his only child, the boy he'd worked 18-hour days to give a better life, and saw something he'd never seen before. Vincent looked like a man who'd found his purpose. "What is it, Vincent?"
If you had met Mama today, if she was poor, if she was from another country, if everyone said she wasn't good enough for our family, would you have married her anyway? Antonio set down his gardening tools and really looked at his son. "Tell me about her." So Vincent did. He told his father about Elena's strength and determination, about her brilliant mind and compassionate heart, about how she'd turned down charity but earned every opportunity she'd been given. He told him about her dead brother and her impossible dreams, about how she made Vincent want to be the man his father had raised him to be. "She sounds like your mother," Antonio said finally. "Your mother was poor when I met her. Her family thought I was crazy for chasing dreams instead of getting a steady job. But she believed in me when no one else did, and she made me better than I was alone." "So what do I do, Papa?" Antonio smiled. You go get her, and you bring her home so I can meet the woman who put that look in my son's eyes. Vincent hugged his father, feeling like he was 18 years old again and asking for permission to take his first real risk. Papa, as he headed for his car, what if she won't listen to me? What if Catherine convinced her that I'm not serious about her? Antonio's answer was simple and perfect. Then you prove to her that you are. By sunrise, Vincent was on a plane to Romania, carrying nothing but a suitcase, his grandmother's engagement ring, and a heart full of determination. Grandma, he had no idea that Elena was sitting in her childhood bedroom in a village outside Bucharest, staring at the same sunrise and wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. But sometimes that's how the best love stories work. Both people have to be willing to fight for each other, even when, especially when, everything seems impossible. Elena's village looked exactly the same as when she'd left 2 years ago. Small houses with red tile roofs, narrow cobblestone streets, and everyone knowing each other's business before breakfast was finished. She sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by medical textbooks she'd brought home and acceptance letters from Romanian universities that felt like prison sentences. Her mother, Anya, brought her tea and sat on the edge of the bed like she used to when Elena was small and sick. You want to tell me what really happened in America? Anya asked in Romanian. Elena had told her parents that she was homesick, that she wanted to finish her medical degree in Romania to be closer to family. But mothers know when their children are lying, especially when those children have been crying in their sleep. I fell in love with someone I couldn't have, Elena said simply. Couldn't have? Or wouldn't let yourself have? Elena looked at her mother in surprise. Anya Karenina was a simple woman. She cleaned houses and grew vegetables and had never been more than 50 kilometers from the village where she was born. But her dark eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd seen their children's hearts break and mend. There's a difference? Your brother Mihail, what did he tell you before he died? To save the other children. And have you been doing that? Elena nodded. In New York, I was helping decide which medical research to fund. We saved hundreds of children, maybe thousands. And this man you fell in love with, did he support this work? Elena's chest tightened. He made it possible. Vincent believed in me more than I believed in myself. So why are you here instead of there? Elena told her mother about Catherine, about the engagement photos, about all the reasons why a girl from their village couldn't possibly end up with a billionaire CEO. Anya listened without interruption, then stood up and walked to the window. Elena, come here. Elena joined her mother at the window, which looked out over the small cemetery where Mihail was buried. When your brother was dying, I begged God to take me instead. I offered him everything, my life, my soul, anything, if he would just let my baby boy live. And when Mihail died anyway, I was angry. I thought God wasn't listening. Elena had never heard her mother talk about Mihail's death this way. But then I watched you pack your bags and leave everything you knew to chase an impossible dream in a country where you didn't speak the language perfectly, where you had no money and no connections. And I realized that God had been listening. He just answered my prayers differently than I expected.
Elena felt tears start to fall. Mikhail didn't die so you could play it safe, Elena. He died so you could live boldly enough for both of you. And if this Vincent loves you the way you love him, then you owe it to your brother's memory to fight for that love. Before Elena could respond, there was a commotion in the street outside. Car doors slamming, voices speaking in English, her neighbors gathering to stare at something. Elena looked out the window and felt her heart stop. Vincent was standing in the middle of their tiny street, looking completely out of place in his expensive clothes, surrounded by curious villagers and holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Her favorite flowers, the ones that reminded her of Mikhail. "Oh my God," Elena whispered. "Is that him?" Anya asked. Elena could only nod. "He's very handsome, and he looks like he hasn't slept in days." Vincent was talking to Elena's neighbor, Mrs. Popescu, in broken Romanian that he'd clearly learned on the plane. Elena watched him point toward their house, watched Mrs. Popescu nod and gesture wildly, watched him smile with relief and exhaustion. "Elena," her mother said gently, "that man just traveled 5,000 miles to stand in our street and look like a fool in front of the entire village. I think he might be serious about you." Elena ran downstairs and threw open the front door just as Vincent was walking up their garden path. They stared at each other for a long moment, both of them breathing hard, both of them afraid to speak first. Vincent looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was messy, his shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But those eyes were looking at Elena like she was water in the desert. "Elena Cup, you came," Elena whispered. "Of course I came." Vincent's voice was hoarse. "Elena, we need to talk. I know what Catherine told you, and I know what the photos looked like, but it wasn't real. None of it was real. The only real thing in my life is standing right in front of me." Elena felt her carefully constructed walls starting to crumble. "Vincent, you don't understand. I'm not good enough for your world." "Stop." Vincent stepped closer. "Just stop. Do you want to know what I've been doing for the past 24 hours? Elena nodded. "I've been thinking about what my life was like before I met you. Empty meetings, meaningless decisions, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. And then I imagined what my life would be like if I let you go. 40 more years of that emptiness, Elena. 40 years of wondering, what if? And knowing I was too much of a coward to fight for the best thing that ever happened to me." Vincent dropped to his knee right there in the garden, in front of the growing crowd of neighbors, in the middle of the village where Elena had grown up poor and dreaming. "Elena Karenina," he said, pulling out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I don't care what anyone thinks about us. I don't care about the differences in our backgrounds or our bank accounts or anything else. I care about the way you make me want to be better. I care about the way you see the world and the way you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I care about spending the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how extraordinary you are." Elena was crying now, and she could hear her neighbors gasping and whispering. "Will you marry me?" Vincent asked simply. "Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved, and will you keep making me better every day for the next 60 years? Elena looked into Vincent's eyes and saw her future. Not just the fairy tale parts, but the real parts. Working together to save children's lives, building a family rooted in love and purpose, growing old together while never losing the spark that brought them together in the first place. She thought about Mikhail, about the promise she'd made to him, about how Vincent had helped her keep that promise in ways she never could have imagined. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes!" The entire village erupted in cheers as Vincent slipped the ring onto Elena's finger and kissed her like she was his whole world. Because she was. "Grandma, I wish you could have been at their wedding 6 months later. It was held in Elena's village, with reception tables set up in the main square, and Elena's mother cooking for 300 guests. Vincent's father flew in from New York and spent the entire weekend learning Romanian curse words from the local men. Catherine wasn't invited, obviously.
But the most beautiful moment happened during the ceremony itself. Elena and Vincent had written their own vows, and when it was Elena's turn to speak, she looked out at all the faces, Her family, Vincent's family, the villagers who had watched her grow up, the friends from New York who had flown in to celebrate. "Vincent," she said, her voice clear and strong, "when I was 12 years old, I made a promise to my brother that I would save children's lives. What I didn't know then was that I would need someone to save mine first. You didn't rescue me from poverty or struggle. You rescued me from believing I wasn't worthy of extraordinary love." She paused, looking directly at Vincent, whose eyes were shining with tears. "I promise you that I will never stop fighting for the children who need us. I promise you that I will never stop challenging you to be your best self. And I promise you that I will love you with the same fierce determination that brought me from this village to New York, completely, fearlessly, and forever." Vincent's vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. "Elena, you taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lives changed, dreams achieved, and love shared. I promise to spend the rest of my life earning the trust you've placed in me." 2 years later, Elena graduated from Columbia Medical School as valedictorian. Vincent was in the front row cheering louder than anyone when she walked across the stage. They moved to Romania for Elena's residency, where she specialized in pediatric cardiology at the hospital they'd funded together through the Corleone Foundation. 5 years after that first day on Fifth Avenue, Elena performed her first successful heart surgery on a 7-year-old boy named Mikhail, a name that was no coincidence. His parents had named him after Elena's brother, whose story had become legend in their village. As she scrubbed out after the surgery, knowing that little Mikhail would grow up to play soccer and go to school and maybe have children of his own, Elena felt her brother's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the empty scrub room. "All of them." Vincent and Elena had 3 children of their own, 2 daughters and a son they named Antonio after Vincent's father. They divided their time between New York and Romania, running the foundation that had grown into the largest pediatric medical charity in the world. But every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, Vincent and Elena returned to that same corner of Fifth Avenue. Elena would bring a cooler of water bottles, and they would give them away for free to anyone who looked like they could use a cold drink and a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. One hot Tuesday morning, as they stood on that corner with their teenage daughters helping to distribute water, a young businessman in an expensive suit stopped and bought a bottle. "Keep the change," he said, handing Elena a $20 bill. "No need," Elena smiled. "Today they're free." The man looked confused. "Why?" Elena glanced at Vincent, who nodded encouragingly. "Because 15 years ago, my husband saw me selling water on this exact corner to pay for school. Instead of just buying a bottle, he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He invested in my dreams, and now we invest in other people's." The businessman looked at Vincent, then back at Elena, and then at their daughters who were chattering excitedly about the medical research papers they'd been reading. That's incredible. You two are living proof that fairy tales can come true." Vincent and Elena exchanged a look full of inside jokes and shared memories and the kind of love that only gets deeper with time. "No," Vincent said gently, "we're living proof that when you find someone worth fighting for, the fairy tale is just the beginning." Grandma, if anyone has made it to the end of this story, I hope they'll take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share their own love stories in the comments below, because the world needs more reminders that real love, the kind that sees potential instead of problems, the kind that chooses growth over comfort, the kind that fights for each other instead of giving up, still exists. Vincent and Elena's story started with water bottles on a Manhattan street corner, but it became something eternal, a love that changed not just their lives, but the lives of thousands of children around the world who are alive today because two people chose to believe that extraordinary things happen to ordinary people who refuse to settle for ordinary love. Sometimes the best investments aren't in stocks or bonds or real estate, Grandma. Sometimes the best investments are in people who dream bigger than their circumstances and love deeper than their fears. That's what Vincent learned when he saw Elena on Fifth Avenue. And that's what Elena learned when she said yes to extraordinary love in a small village in Romania, surrounded by sunflowers and possibility and the promise that some stories really do have happy endings. The end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Letter to Grandma and share your own love story in the comments below, because everyone deserves to believe in extraordinary love, and everyone's story matters.